It really is a particular honor to introduce our neighbor and cooperator this year. At a time of upheaval and uncertainty, when our movement matters more than ever, it felt really important to recognize one of our leaders who's also a partner, a collaborator, and in this case, a good friend who represents the kind of vision and unwavering commitment needed at this moment. Doug has been with NCBA CLUSA, the National Cooperative Business Association, since 2016 and became president and CEO in 2018. Before joining the association, he led the work of the White House Rural Council and served in top positions at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where he focused on rural economic development. In his capacity with NCBA, Doug works with the cooperative community both domestically and internationally to deepen its impact and influence. He also serves on the board of the International Cooperative Alliance and DOT Cooperation. And this award recognizes his nearly decade of leadership. I said in the annual report it was a decade, and I'm going to stick with that, but it's not for a few more months. His nearly decade of leadership at NCBA, the critical role of the organization in representing and advocating for our co-ops and credit unions, and its partnership with the NFCA as we've worked to advance our vision of a thriving cooperative economy. It's been my pleasure to work with Doug on the NCBA board over the years, and a real honor to present him with our Neighbor and Cooperator Award as we continue to ensure that our co-ops and their associations thrive, empowering more people to build a more resilient and inclusive community for everyone and a better world for all. Doug.
Thank you. I get a plate.
Awesome. I know how long you've been waiting for this.
I do. I love these plates.
So we got to get a photo first.
All right.
I'm going to take it.
Okay. Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you very much. Really, it is. I'm going to take this and wander because I like to wander. If that's okay.
You've got the remote.
I got the remote right there. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Urban. And thank you all for being here, and thank you for the award. I really do see the award as a, it's really not about me, but it's about NCBA, which is to say it's about our entire cooperative community, which I have a few remarks, and that's what I'm going to focus on is Principle 6, what it means for association, what it means today. I do want to recognize a few folks, talk about association. We've got 3 of the board members for the National Cooperative Business Association are here. I'm going to recognize them in a second, but I'm going to talk about NCBA just for a moment. National Cooperative Business Association, CLUSA International, actually, is the full name. We are the umbrella or the apex association here in the United States for all kinds of cooperatives. So we have food cooperatives. NFCA is a very active member of ours. NCG. We have individual food cooperatives. About 10 of you in here. Thank you very much for being a member of NCBA. Actually, 7 of you have renewed, and there's 3 that haven't, so I might be talking to a few folks. And we have farmer cooperatives, and we have housing cooperatives, and we have credit unions, and we have worker cooperatives, and now data cooperatives. All kinds of cooperatives are members of NCBA CLUSA. And NCBA CLUSA is a member of the International Cooperative Alliance, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. The board members of NCBA CLUSA, we have 23 board members from kind of all walks, really a very good representation. And 3 of them are here. Cornelius Blanding, who is running one of the workshops or is participating in one of the workshops in a little bit, from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. He can talk about that. Christina Jennings from Shared Capital Cooperative, right here. And Urban Kroll has been on our board for, I'm going to mention it. Got it. For too long. 15 years? Something like that? Before I got there, anyway. Maybe longer than that. Urban served as chair of NCBA CLUSA about 6 years ago. Urban and I serve on the board of DOT Co-op, the entity that owns the domain, .coop. And Urban's very active in the International Cooperative Alliance on a couple really important working groups. One looking at the cooperative identity and a potential kind of review and renewal of that. And another one, he was with the working group that set up the co-op cultural heritage sites that will be talked about a little bit later today. So Urban is just a fantastic example of leaning in, of association of people giving their time and energy to advance a common cause. I also want to recognize Joe Bergeron, who's here and was on the board when I started and was a longtime board member of NCBA CLUSA and led the Vermont, I always get the name wrong. Yes, thank you. Association of Vermont Credit Unions for years, up until last year. So is a great cooperative leader, not only in this region, but across the nation. So it's great to see Joe. So let's see. I'll call out Dami Odatala over here at National Cooperative Bank. The National Cooperative Bank is a member of NCBA CLUSA. Dami's colleague is a very active board member, and I'm actually going to refer to them a little bit. It's great to have a bank that is of the cooperative system. So, all right. So, cooperative association. Talk about these three levels a little bit as NFCA celebrates its 15th year. The National Cooperative Business Association is celebrating its 110th year. So I'll use this slide to talk about a little bit of history. In 1916, a guy named Peter Warbass, who was a surgeon in New York City, he really invested, I think he bankrolled this association for a number of years. And this was in 1916 when, the conversation in the country was really around, was unfettered capitalism, serving the country in very poor ways. There was, a lot of energy around socialism and communism. This is 1916, right? So it was before sort of the Bolshevik Revolution and a lot of that before that conversation changed in the United States. But there was a third way, and it was a real conversation of creating a cooperative commonwealth so that essentially the entire economy would be run on a cooperative model. One person, one vote. The patronage, the surplus goes back to people based on how much they use a business as opposed to how much they invest it. And one of the leaders in this idea around a cooperative commonwealth was Peter Warbass. And so he started this association in 1916. And in 1922, he created the symbol of the Twin Pines. And the Twin Pines, of course, it's rare to see a pine tree by itself. Twin Pines are a symbol of when living organisms work together, they're stronger. There's a symbiosis. There's some great symbolism around the green, the verdant, the everlasting. The Twin Pines itself, it has yellows, the energy from the sun that continues to, kind of build this circular relationship. And the Twin Pines, if you have traveled, and if you're like me and a bunch of other folks in here, and you're always looking for where's the co-ops, and you go to Latin America and you see Twin Pines actually it's almost ubiquitous in many Latin American countries that if you're a co-op, you use the Twin Pines as your symbol in all of the co-op associations. I got to go to Colombia 2 years ago, and their big mutual insurance company that is sort of the mutual insurance company for cooperatives there. Co-op, not Co-op Nama, but it's Co-op something. They had a museum, in the museum of a cooperative history museum, and it was like a full-on museum with a curator and a historian. And I saw the Twin Pines around there, and the story as I understand it, and nobody's ever told me I'm wrong, so I guess this is like the story. The reason why the Twin Pines went down that far and were picked up so much is that in the 1960s and 70s, NCBA CLUSA was very active in doing international development in that region. And this was a time when there was sort of a new generation of cooperatives that were coming up, and we, NCBA CLUSA, helped them create their cooperative communities and their development ecosystems, and they adopted the Twin Pines from NCBA CLUSA. And somewhat ironically, the Twin Pines in the United States, you see it, particularly worker co-ops, some food co-ops, but the adoption isn't that huge in the U.S. actually, but it is in different parts of the world, which is really interesting. And as a side note, I guess I've talked about international assistance, just to give you a sense of the experience of the last year of this association, of the Umbrella Association, and the socioeconomic and the policy upheaval. It's hit everybody in this room, many people in much more personal ways. For our association, it's meant a lot because we have done international work bringing the cooperative principles to communities since 1953. The board of NCBA CLUSA at that time there were some food co-ops. I think that most of the folks around there are actually farmer co-ops. They were board members of sizable farm co-ops. And they chose to send a co-op developer to India. 1953, India just had obtained its independence. And we helped farmers in India create cooperatives. Some of the biggest cooperatives in the world now are in India. We helped develop some of those, including one called IFCO, Indian Farmers Fertilizer Cooperative. It's a federated cooperative of 17,000 or 13 individual co-ops. They have 50 million people that are members of that co-op in India. And that speaks a little bit to the power of association. We also helped NCBA CLUSA, along with other cooperative associations, the Rural Electric Cooperative Association, the Credit Union Association, CUNA. We helped create USAID. And what happened, there was a small group of entities that had been doing development work, and the federal government was involved in international development, but kind of at the Department of Commerce, the State Department, it was kind of all over the place, and it was small. And in 1962, a group of us came together to champion the idea of U.S. helping others really develop their economies, for humanitarian reasons, for national security reasons, and to bring democracy, the idea of democracy, across the world. And in different administrations over time, they supported the idea of cooperative development as a pillar of international development for different reasons. Sometimes it was because we want good trading partners and we want them to have healthy economies, and co-ops are a good way to grow economy and stabilize economies. Sometimes it was national security reasons, and sometimes it was to move the democratic idea. Once somebody learns democracy, it's really hard to unlearn it. If you learn it in your business, then you're going to start asking, why not in my civic life as well? So it was a way to bring democracy across the world. Well, last year, we had 15 projects that we were doing all over the place: Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America. And first it was USAID. They all got terminated. And then we had about half of our revenue actually came from USDA Foreign Ag Service doing the same kind of stuff in July. Those got terminated. So we, with the power of association again, we were able to weather that because of our members, because of the National Cooperative Bank and a bunch of others, and a bunch of individuals who came together to support our association so we could continue our mission of defending, advocating, and promoting cooperatives. And we shifted our strategy. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. So I used up some time there. So the why of Principle 6. Principle 6, of course, call it out. What's the sixth cooperative principle? Thank you. Yeah, this group knows it. Not all cooperative groups know all of their principles, but this one does. And, we don't do association just to do association. Why do we do this? Because it's not easy. I mean, a lot of you got up super early in the morning so you could come do this. So you could be doing something with your family or your kids or your grandkids. Okay. Oh, no, but you choose to do it because it's important. And it's why do we do this? Why do we choose to do this? We enjoy each other. That's a big piece of it. But for NCBA CLUSA, the why, I mentioned our mission before, it's to develop, advance, and protect cooperatives. That's been our mission for 110 years, as far as I know. Our vision since 2017, our board adopted a vision of helping more people use cooperatives to build a more inclusive economy. Urban had a huge hand in that work as we adopted, and just a couple years ago, the board reaffirmed and recommitted to that vision. So that's our mission and vision. It's very aligned to NFCA's. But how do we do that? Like, how are we going to get this done? And we do it by working together in association. Just thinking about the roles of this ecosystem of association. NFCA, just a great report there of its legacy of regional leadership and shared services, advocacy, public awareness. That doesn't happen, if that founding group and then over the years, people continued to choose to work together to move and advance that mission over time. For NCBA, CLUSA, talked about the 110 years, just a few data points. There's over 150 million people in the United States who are members of cooperatives. The vast majority of those are credit union members. But, over half of our food comes through some type of cooperative, dairy being the biggest. Over 80% of dairy at one point or another comes through a producer-owned cooperative. You know this, a lot of the really common food brands, they're actually owned by the people who use them, right? Ocean Spray and Blue Diamond and Sunkist and Floors Natural and Sunmade, and the list goes on and on. In utility, not as much in New England, but particularly in the Midwest and the Southeast, towards the West, most of the electricity comes from cooperatives that are owned and controlled by their members. And so that's, this idea of a cooperative is not a marginal one. It's not a niche thing. I mean, it has absolutely gone to scale and made a huge difference. And I'll talk just briefly about the International Cooperative Alliance. So this group is composed of national associations as well as other individual co-ops and individual associations are part of it. And they're in many ways, they're kind of the holder of the cooperative identity. And the cooperative identity, what is the cooperative identity? It's the 7 principles. That's what, if people know anything about the cooperative identity, they probably know about the cooperative principles, but it's also the definition of cooperatives, and it's the shared cooperative values, which some other year I'd love to come and we can talk a whole lot more about the cooperative values, because there's a lot to the shared cooperative values that we act on. There's over 3 million cooperatives across the globe and over 1 billion members. And ICA works a lot with the UN. Urban talked about the Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations proclaimed the International Year of the Co-ops, recognizing that cooperatives are one of the best and most effective strategies to really, push forward on those Sustainable Development Goals. Goals like eradicating poverty, ensuring everybody has housing, ensuring everybody has access to decent food. How does that happen across the world? The cooperatives have proven to be one of the best strategies to really get those better outcomes, and that's why the UN, and in fact, 2 months ago, the UN, now every 10 years will be a year of cooperatives. That just happened. So now we know in 2035, yeah, that's a big deal actually. It's going to be, so we know we can get on a cadence as a cooperative community and really make the most of, this not only celebration, but as Urban said, it's a challenge for us as a cooperative community to really optimize, the power of cooperatives. So today's context, I could have used much sharper words than that. I mean, we're in a tough moment right now. Economically, your sector it's really challenging. For a lot of farm sectors, and that's kind of spreading. It is really challenging right now. What's happening in Iran right now only is exacerbating all of it. It's energy prices, which for a lot of the food, most of the food for certain parts of the food system, energy is actually the biggest driver, right, of cost. And we know that there's a lot of policy gaps that make it hard for people to use cooperatives, to grow cooperatives. We know that just the instability within the policy of environment. It's really hard to predict what the federal government will do. And in that context, trying to make decisions, you as board members, you as general managers, are trying to operate in this context is a huge challenge. And then as a cooperative community, lack of awareness of cooperatives and a challenging media environment, I can bunch those together. Trying to bust through to get people's attention today is a real quandary, right? So it's a perpetual for those in the cooperative community, best kept secret. It's kind of always been that way, I think, and we work together to try to make it better, and we make some progress, but to deal with this context, how do we do it? How can we advance? How can we bust through? How can we make policy better? We have to do it together. I mean, that's why that principle is there. This stuff, better policy, increased public awareness, it is not going to happen by itself, and no one individual or one group or one cooperative, even if it's some of the biggest cooperatives, they are not going to make progress by themselves. We have to do this together. So in this kind of context, this is when cooperatives matter most. When we're faced with a challenging time, it's when co-ops are most relevant. The history of cooperatives in the United States, the first big sector to take it on was farmers. And in that story, just a little bit more on history, that trajectory of the cooperative story in the United States it's a really rich story. For many of you know that sort of the Western story of cooperatives, the typical narrative, kind of the Genesis story, is Rochdale, right? A bunch of small business people, weavers, were very frustrated that they couldn't get access just to decent, wholesome food at a decent price, so they came together in a cooperative, and they picked out. There was a number of kind of social entrepreneurs who were testing different ways to go about business, and they picked out some of the most successful approaches, and they put together the cooperative principles. In that Rochdale cooperative, it continues today, actually. There's one of the major cooperatives in the UK, is from that group of pioneers in 1844 to put that together. And then this is kind of the Western story. Then that spreads pretty quickly to other countries in Europe, the idea of the cooperative approach. And European immigrants here in the United States now have knowledge about this. And farmers, in particular, who were getting squeezed by industrialization and were losing their access to the market, were diminishing in their market power. They knew about cooperatives, so they formed cooperatives. And they created and organized an association and leveraged their political power to create a whole system of laws that support farmer cooperatives. A generation later, 90% of the people in the city had access to electricity, and only 10% of the people in the country in 1930 had access to electricity. In 1932, Franklin Roosevelt puts a subsidy to try to get the investor-owned utilities to create and to move out electric distribution out into the country, but it wasn't rich enough for the investor-owned utilities. They couldn't pencil it. It didn't make sense for them to do it. But by this time, most of the farmers knew about co-ops, and they're like, oh, we'll create our own business, and we'll partner with the federal government, and we'll solve this problem. And within a generation, 90% of the people in the country had access to electricity, and it was because of co-ops. So that, again, in a time of great challenge, people came together in association to solve a problem. And, you know, I could talk about that, a few more examples. That historical thread of the, you know, there's these people in the United Kingdom and then Europe and then the U.S., but the U.S. story is so much more rich. Our cooperative community also benefits from Native American communities that were here in the United States. You know, and many of those tribes and nations, they had very cooperative approaches to community and to economy. And then we also benefit a huge way from people from Africa, who in many of their economies were very cooperative, and people, most of them, brought over in bondage, but they brought that with them. And so the U.S. story isn't just, you know, it isn't just a UK story. It is that, but it's so much more. And we think of a couple more modern examples of how this cooperative ecosystem really benefits. Urban mentioned that the median store age in the region was 44 years, which is really impressive. We look at the international literature, co-ops last longer than non-co-ops. And I think the reason for that is because they're so fundamental to the community and whatever they're doing. If people chose to work for up to 10 years to put this thing together, you know, they've got money invested in it, but they have a lot more than that. They've got a lot of social capital. You know, they understand that co-op is so important to the community that they're going to figure out how to make sure that it can continue to survive. And, you know, and you have co-ops that last longer than non-co-ops. In 2008, this is just a couple dot points here. In the real estate housing crash, the performance of credit unions in particular, Joe's just walking out, you could do this in your sleep, whatever those data points were. Credit unions, the way that they engaged with homeowners at that point, I actually don't have these data points in my head, but the relative to non-cooperative financial institutions, I think non-cooperative financial institutions were 3 or 4 times more likely to foreclose on their borrowers for 2 reasons. One was they were, the non-co-ops were much more likely to get into these weird financial arrangements than credit unions were. Like, credit unions weren't going to do that because the boards of the credit unions, who were the members, the people of the community, they weren't going to let their CEOs and their GMs do it because they couldn't understand these things. It's like, that's one reason that credit unions perform better. The other one was that even if, some borrowers were getting into trouble with their credit union, the credit union was much more likely to help them get through it, to help them figure out how to get to the other side. And so that was a time. And then during COVID, particularly I think food co-ops, but not only food co-ops, the way that when it hit, 6 years ago exactly, right? Almost like exactly. When it hit, you were there partly because you were closer to the local regional food system, so you had a more resilient food system, but largely due to the fact that you were of the community, you understood, where those needs were, and you went the extra mile to make sure that people continued to have access and the doors were open. So what do associations enable? We talked about this. I'll go, we can go real quick here. Advocacy. I work in Washington, D.C., to a guy with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, so a solution to everything, there's got to be some policy solution, which of course isn't the fact, but policy is it is the thing that enables, like literally, for your businesses to be able to come together as this people-centered business. It's state policy, it's federal policy. They can solve their business problems together in shared services, leadership development, and inspiration, actually. I mean, we are human-centered organizations, associations as cooperatives, and we need to find hope and aspiration. And the best place to find it is by people in our community, others who share our values and priorities. A few things that co-ops have done together. That first bullet point is absolutely fundamental and not talked about that much. So we, as a community over time, we've got these laws that enable people to come together. We've got a cooperative tax system that generally, it's a single tax as opposed to a double tax. That's a big deal. It's a big economic deal that makes things possible. There's some things around antitrust. There's some other things. And we not only created these, but we have to protect them. In association, that's what we do. Last year, there was a great example of this. We've talked about this. We had a panel on it that Joe was on last year. Yeah. The Don't Tax My Credit Union. There was the big tax bill. In the debate running up to that, the private banks went after the credit unions to change their tax status, and it was real. I mean, it was a real threat, and there were predictions that 70% of the credit unions would have shut down within a few years if that would have passed. The credit unions came together, but not only the credit unions. Urban mentioned, there was a call on the members of this region to reach out to your congresspeople and senators. There were the different sectors came together to defend that tax status, and we were successful. So again, in association, that's how we were able to do it. When COVID hit, and within within a couple weeks, Congress acted to create the COVID relief programs, the PPP, the EIDL, whatever that was. When those rolled out, there were some sectors in the cooperative community that weren't eligible. So we were able, in association, within 2 days, I reached out to the executives of all the sectoral associations and asked if they would join in a letter to Congress that made the very simple point that all cooperatives need to be eligible. And we were successful in that. And it had an impact on different sectors of billions of dollars, actually, and really made sure that a lot of cooperatives could remain. Over the years, we allied when farmers and others in the rural Southeast, in the African American community in the mid-1960s and the late 1960s, were coming together to form the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. NCBA CLUSA was able to, because we were an association, we were able to be an ally with them, to support them as they sought to use the cooperative business model as a strategy for economic franchise, along with the work that they were doing for civic franchise. So that's another example. So today, there's a quick example of, because we have these associations. So, is it Friday, 8 days ago, maybe, you called me, Urban called, and said that there was some legislative activity happening in Connecticut to amend the cooperative statute. So, like in that 24 hours, Urban and I talked a few times, the lobbyists that we have at NCBA CLUSA, Lee and Ned, was involved. Urban was able to reach out to two of the foremost experts in the world on cooperative enabling legislation who work at the International Cooperative Alliance. And within, 4 or 5 days, we were able to submit testimony to the Judiciary Committee in Connecticut that supported some good things that were in that bill, and also pointed out some things that were problematic. And that testimony is now there. You know, exactly what influence it will have, time will tell. But without association, you know, especially with cooperatives, what can happen at the state level especially, people will start changing laws and they don't understand what a cooperative is. Like, they literally don't understand what a cooperative is. And they think, well, this is the way we do it for C Corps, so we're just going to do it that way. Well, that undermines our ability to use this amazing business model. So that in association, we have to pay attention to that. I'll point out, we have next to DAMI, NCBA CLUSA has a few materials there, and there's little QR codes and some other things that are policy priorities. So on behalf of the cooperative community, a few of these that we're working on these days is expanding employee ownership, leveraging the Farm Bill, improve SNAP policy so you can work with more people in your community, in your members, improve co-op development. We are always making sure that co-ops are treated fairly in the tax system. And we have worked, particularly with National Co-op Bank, but with many others, on ensuring that co-ops can use a small business administration. It's a huge challenge because I just talked about that when policymakers don't understand how co-ops really work. In the SBA, it's a huge problem. They don't understand that, you know, that the co-ops, you know, that they're terrifically vibrant, vital businesses, small businesses in the community, but the guaranteed loan programs for SBA don't work for co-ops because SBA requires all the owners to personally guarantee those loans. Well, that's bananas for a co-op that has hundreds or thousands of members. It doesn't work, right? So we have to work with them to change that. Something that I'll just mention quickly in passing that we're working more and more on is housing cooperative, and particularly limited equity cooperative housing that works for lower income people. You know, there's a housing crisis really everywhere, rural places, urban places, and co-ops have a lot more to offer there. So we're about time, so I'm gonna go super fast. So the co-op ecosystem allows us to do, you know, all of this together. That's what Principle 6 is about. At the end, I have to do a call to action. Before I do the call to action, though, I have to, again, thank all of you for, you know, for the work that you do. I mean, this is the call to action. It's a little bit like when I went to a Catholic college in Dubuque, Iowa, and you go to Mass, and there was one priest that was famous for lambasting everybody in church because not very many students went to Mass. And it's like, well, wait a second, we're the ones who are sitting in church. So this call to action is like, you know, I ask the cooperative community to do more. But I recognize that you're choosing to be here today. Many of you, you know, have chosen to take the time to lead your board, you know, to lead your cooperative, and you make a huge difference. So the first thing is thank you, and the second thing is here's what you can do, right? So advocacy, when you want to influence a policymaker, you want to make sure that when you have that conversation with the policymaker, it's not the first conversation. You know, so that's something both your state legislators, your local government officials, and your federal officials, invite them to your co-op. And I mean, all your congressional people, they have district people. Just invite, they'll come. And you tell your story about what you do for your community. And then when you need them to do something else, or you're trying to influence them on a vote, you can call them, and they know the impact that you have, and they're going to listen to you. So more advocacy. Education, I'll just point out, we also have, we're moving out at NCBA CLUSA and creating some more educational programming. and there's some information on the table. We've heard over the years how important it is that more and more people really understand what the co-op is, and we've got a number of different ways that can really, both staff and members and leadership and the board. There you go, that's the conclusion. Cooperation matters most in challenging times. We are in a challenging time, and the way to really advance the cooperative, the power of cooperatives is by working together in association. So thank you for everything that you do for your co-op and for your community, and thank you on behalf of NCBA CLUSA for the recognition in the Neighboring Co-op Award. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. See that?